as well. I was looking here in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and today we're actually going to sneak back into a portion that we read last week as well, and so kind of tie those things together with what we're going to talk about today. But I want to share with you a story. I heard Chuck Swindoll share this story years ago, and he talks about this pastor who was preaching revival somewhere. He had two dogs. He had two large dogs. I believe they were Dobermans, if I remember correctly, and they're running around his backyard. Now, I've never been a big dog person. We've never owned one. We've always had small dogs, and so I've never had one of these like large dogs run around our yard and all that kind of stuff. And so this guy has these two large dogs, and he said this little bulldog shows up into the yard, and he's washing dishes, and he hears this commotion outside. So he looks out the window there, looking out his back yard there, standing at the sink, and he sees his two dogs in a fight with a bulldog, and his dogs beat this bulldog to shreds. And the bulldog kind of goes out and crawls back under the fence where he came and kind of shook himself off a little bit, and he's got cuts and stuff, and he just starts walking back. The next day, he's there, and there's the same situation. The bulldog shows up, and the dogs start jumping on that dog and starts whooping him real good again, and then the bulldog goes back under the fence and goes and starts leaving again. And the pastor had to go. He said he was preaching a revival, and he had to leave, and so he tells his wife, hey, keep an eye on these dogs while I'm gone. They're getting a fight every day with this bulldog, and they're whooping him pretty good, but keep an eye on our dogs. He goes off to revival, comes back at the end. It was one of these week-long things, and he makes it back home on the next Saturday. He left on a Saturday, makes it back on the next Saturday, and he walks in, and he hears a commotion out in the backyard, and it's his two dogs running around the yard and then going into the back corner of the yard. And the bulldog comes under the fence and takes a lap around the yard and then just goes back out under the fence. He's like, what is going on? What happened while I was gone? He said, every day that dog would show up and would fight our dogs. And every day our dogs would whoop their dog until about on Tuesday. And our dogs got tired of fighting. And every day that dog would come in and he would start nipping at them, and they would kind of start running and trying to look for a place to hide until they found a place to hide. And so since about Thursday or Friday, the dog would come in and just take a lap around the yard and then go right back under the fence and leave. I love that. Because I was always told, and bulldogs aren't very big, but they're built like a fire plug. You know what I mean? Dobermans are bigger dogs. And I was always told as a kid, because I was never that big kid, I was always told it's not the size, finish it, of the dog in the fight, right? It's the size of the fight in the dog. We found out who played football, at least, or who was undersized in football. It was none of y'all. I was the one. Coach said that to me. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. I never wanted to give up. That dog never gave up every day until he ruled the roost. This is what we're talking about today. We're talking about the idea of being a faithful servant. We're continuing on this sermon series that we call Culture Clash, living Christ-like in a Christless culture. We cry out for things like faithfulness that we're going to be talking about today, this idea of the faithful servant. And I want to draw your attention to 1 Corinthians chapter 4. We'll begin reading in verse number 1. It says this. We're only going to read the first two verses, and then we'll put it in the context. Let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. Let's talk about this idea of being a faithful servant today as we get into this text. There's reports, 1 Corinthians. There's reports that have come to Paul, who was the founding pastor of the church, and he shows up and he establishes the church. He's there for 18 months and he moves away. He goes on to plant other churches, and reports come to him that there's quarrels happening, there's issues that are happening, there's fights that are unfolding, there are divisions, there are difficulties, there is disorder in the church. So he writes them a letter. We know in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 that this letter we have that we call 1 Corinthians is not the first letter. It's actually the second one that Paul wrote to them, and he said, I've got to write you another one because you misunderstood the first one, and so let me get that taken care of for you. So he writes this letter because of the word that he received from a lady by the name of Chloe and by three gentlemen that showed up and shared truth with him. So this letter is a frank discussion of the church and its issues. There was a lot of sin that was involved. There was mainly sin in the midst of the church that he had to deal with, and some is very serious, and he's going to deal with it in chapter 4. He calls the church out of this Christless culture. It's a bold call to purity and to life and to sound doctrine. And so as he goes through this, he's going to emphasize Christian conduct and emphasize Christian ideals. The church was living in the midst of a Christless culture. It was rough. As a matter of fact, the church was living with one foot in the culture and one foot in the church. He is saying, listen, you're trying to live in a culture that was extremely wicked. The city of Corinth was a very wealthy city. It was a city that had all sorts of educated people, and it had all classes of people, and it was the meeting point. It was a port, and it was the shortest way to get from one sea to another was just to go through the land, and not to sail all the way around. They would go through the land, and so there was people coming all the time through the area. The most prominent of all the temples was the Temple of Aphrodite, and it was a very pagan place, and they would have 1,000 temple prostitutes that were available to anybody who wanted to worship in that temple in that way. This is the culture in which the church was living in, and the church had problems inside the church, some sinful, some just other issues that had to be straightened out. That's what this letter is. Paul in chapter 2 begins to talk about the role of the Holy Spirit and the power of the Holy Spirit. In chapter 3, he begins to speak of the foundation and the growth of living. And now we've made it to chapter 4, where Paul is going to share more truths with us. Now, I do believe that there is a longing in every single person to be surrounded by faithfulness. I think people want to be surrounded by something faithful. In every relationship, we desire for that relationship to remain faithful. In our friends, we want our friends to remain faithful to us. We want our spouses, we want our jobs, we want them to be faithful to us. I'm going to show up in work, be faithful to pay me, right? We want our bank to be faithful to us. I put money in, I want to show up, I want it still to be there, right? We desire, we crave this faithfulness that's everywhere. I used to take trips to New York City, and I've sent many people on various trips to the place, and people would ask me all the time, where do you eat when you go to New York City? And so we've developed this list of places that we would eat, and if you're interested in eating in New York, I'll be happy to tell you some of the great places that we've eaten over the years. And one of the things I like to do if you're going to go to New York City, you've got to eat from a street vendor, right? That's part of it. I feel like I have a strong enough immune system that I could eat whatever it is that they have. And so I would go there, and people say, I can't believe you eat that. And I'm like, I'm not even sure what that is, but I'm going to have it. So we would go. There was a guy, and there was a specific guy we would go to. Now, these trips lasted about 12 years, over a span of 12 years that I would go. And I went to 31 times I've been in New York. And of the 30 trips that I went, previous to my Israel trip, we go, and we would go see this one guy. He was on 50th and 6th Street, and I saw him every time. He's in between, like Radio City Music Hall's right there, and Rockefeller Center's right here, and he would sit up right here on 6th Street. And we would go to him, and people would say, hey, I want to eat a good street gyro. I said, go see the guy on 50th. His name is Imam. Go by, tell him he sent you by. That didn't get you anything, but his name was Imam, and he was great. I would talk to him. We'd go every single time, maybe 2 times, and it was the kind that had it's the Greek thing with the pita you'd have to eat it like this because the juice would drip off your elbow. How many of you know that's a good gyro? I mean, how many of you have never had a gyro in your life? There's a few of you. Today is the day. He's on 50th and 6th. His name is Imam. Go by and tell him he sent you by. You'll get a good one, I promise. He's there every time. The faithfulness, this is what we desire to be surrounded by, is this idea of faithfulness. And then you read verse number 2. And when you read verse number 2 of 1 Corinthians chapter 4, what does Paul say? Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. Those are strong words that Paul uses in verse number 2 when he's talking about requirements. But to fully understand it, we have to backtrack just a few verses to some verses we read last week. So we're talking about building. Go back to chapter 3. We're talking about building. We're talking about a foundation. We're talking about building on that foundation. And we want to make a few statements today about the faithful servant. So in a way to tie chapter 3 and chapter 4 together and these concepts together, let me make this statement very quickly. The faithful servant does not suffer from self-deceit. So when you get to chapter 4 and he says that the servant is required of servants that they be faithful, let's go back to chapter 3 where it says, verse 18, let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, he taketh the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. It says, therefore let no man glory in men, for all things are yours. We read this last week in the concept of building, and we made this statement that none of us built anything that we are on our own, that we benefited from the people that were before us. And this church specifically was divided amongst Paul and Apollos and Cephas and Christ. And he said, listen, you benefited from all the teaching of all of those people. Stop trying to follow one guy. Stop trying to make it about one. It's all about all of the people that have invested in your life. And so what is Paul doing when he's talking about this idea of self-deceit? He's making an appeal to the logic. He is saying this, that faithfulness is only preceded by humility. Let's say it like this. If anyone seems to be wise, let him embrace that which others believe to be foolish. He's saying this, you want to be faithful. And you want to stand and you want to say, I am a faithful servant of God, but that starts with you embracing the idea that I didn't get here on my own. It starts with the idea of the humility of being able to say, I'm not here choosing sides and I'm not picking allegiances here. I'm just one person in a long line of faithful people. Let me say it like this. We stand on the shoulders of the faithful people before us. You did not get to where you are today in your foundation with the Lord or in the church and in what you've learned. You did not get there on your own. You stand on the shoulders of the people. It was an appeal to understand that there were many people that worked before us, and we reap the benefits of all of those people in that work. So let me ask you this. How dare we think that we are the first faithful people and that all of this is because of us? He goes on to say, furthermore, he said, we belong to Christ. He makes that statement there at the end of verse number 23. He says, ye are Christ and Christ is God's. We belong to Jesus Christ. I believe before we get to the faithfulness of chapter 4, we have to set up the way that it goes. There is a transition. There is a method as it goes from one to the next. And we are this person who is just in a long line of other faithful people that have put their faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ and then shared truths with us. We do not get to where we're standing today without the people in our lives. There is an order to our faithfulness, and it starts with humility. It does not start with us. The order traces all the way back to the Lord, as we see in verse number 23. I was talking to a friend of mine. We were talking about this idea of how we are who we are today because of the people that God allowed to invest into our lives. My faithfulness is encouraged by my friends when I look around and I see other people that are faithful. It's never about the greatness of the servant. It's always about the greatness of the people that invested in that person. And we look around and we say, I'm very thankful, and let's not be self-deceived into believing that our faith is based on us. That our faith, and we are great because we have done this for years and years and years, when the truth is I just stand on the shoulders of the people that have led me here. This is what all of us do. Paul wanted to make sure that the church understood you didn't build that foundation on your own, and the faithfulness that is required of you in chapter 4, verse number 2 is just a continuation of the faithfulness of all the other people that have been in your life. So don't be deceived in yourself. There are many of you that are in here. We are not going to raise hands for this. You have gray hair. But if we were to look at you, your hair is not gray. You color it. You get brushes and makeup, and you do things in the part of your hair to hide the roots. Do women do this? Okay. Do men do this? No, they don't. No, they don't. No, they don't. Please don't. I'm not fighting the gray. I don't want to fight the bald either, but JB's making me fight, continuing to fight. My daughter told me last week, Dad, you don't have a 4-head, you have a 5-head. And that hurt a little bit. Yeah. She said to me. I told Jamie, when it gets to a 6-head, it's going. Like I'm shaving it, man. But I've got gray. I'm not fighting it. People tried to encourage me, hey, color your hair. I'm not doing that. Don't be self-deceived, ladies, when you look in the mirror and you see that red hair that you have. You have gray hair. It's there. You're covering it up. You're self-deceived. Isn't that right? You're trying to deceive the rest of us as well. Listen, we won't talk about this again. I can see that it's not making you happy. So let's learn something else, more fun. I want everybody to do this for me. I want you to take your left hand and I want you to put it on the back of your head like this right here. Everybody do it. Do this right here. I want you to take your right hand, and I want you to put it out like this right here. Just like this right here. Now, I want you to do this very quickly. Okay. That's very good. It's called the sprinkler. It's actually a dance move, and I just taught it to you. The whole crowd, we all learned the sprinkler in less than 10 seconds. This year at the Olympics, break dancing is an event that took place on Friday, and I watched it. And just because you learned a breakdancing move in less than 10 seconds, don't deceive yourself into believing that you're ready for the Olympics. You're not. You're not an athlete just because you did this just a second ago. That's not an Olympic event, by the way. It shouldn't be an Olympic event. It is entertaining to say the least, but it should not be an Olympic event. Who's with me on that one? Okay, very good. It is entertaining, though. Who's with me on that as well? I watched it. I watched the gold medal battle and the bronze medal battle with the men. And look, if somebody had just done that, they would have won gold. That's all it would have taken. Just because you learn to do it in 10 seconds does not mean you are ready for the Olympics. Self-deceit. Here's what I'm trying to say. If we aren't careful, we will be allowed to deceive ourselves to believing something that is just not true. One of those things being, as what Paul was talking about in chapter 3, is that your foundation is a good example of your hard work, when the truth is we stand on the shoulders of the people that were before us. And my faithfulness that we're going to see in chapter 4, verse number 2, that is required of me, that faithfulness is a continuation of the faithfulness of the people before me that helped lay the foundation of my life and the building. And here's the thing, I want you to be faithful. I want to challenge you to being faithful to the Lord, but it starts with us being honest and saying, it's not me that brought me to this place. That I'm just a continuation of the faithfulness of the people who invested in my life a long time ago. The faithful servant starts by understanding I didn't get here alone. And it's easy for me to be faithful when I look around and I see the people that are faithful around me. And the people that were faithful in my life that allowed me to get to here. And I want to draw your attention to verse 1 and 2. In verse 1 and 2 of 1 Corinthians chapter 4, I want you to notice the second truth. The faithful servant embraces the expectation of faithfulness. So look at what he says. There's two things here. There are two truths that we see here. The first one is in verse number 1. Let a man so account of us. We're going to call this the outward truth, or the outward testimony. He says, let a man so account of us. This is the outward testimony about us. Those words in verse number 1 literally is to say, let all, or the following, let all the people estimate of us by all others. They're saying this, everybody's going to make their opinion about who we are. And he says, let everybody make their own opinion about who we are. Let everyone account of us. When you look at my life, then I want you to see something specific. And he says this, let everyone think this about us as the ministers of Christ. Now that word right there in verse number 1, and some of your translations are going to have it differently. It's going to say as the servants of Christ, or he said this, your outward testimony, as people look at you, as they make a perception about who you are, as they make a decision about what kind of person you are, make sure that you are promoting the idea that you are a servant of Jesus Christ. Their opinion, that outward testimony, and let me say this, it matters. There's a context in which people will say, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. That's a problem, because our testimony matters. Now, if somebody was to say like this, I don't care what anybody thinks about me, I'm going to read my Bible every day. Like, okay, I get that. But there's people that will posture and they will say, I don't care what the world thinks about me. No, it does matter. Paul actually says that in verse number 1. Let a man account of us. As people are watching that outward testimony, make sure that we realize that we are the servants of Christ and that we project that we are, in fact, the servants of Christ. He goes on to say this, and stewards of the mysteries of God. He's saying, listen, it's not your mystery, it's God's mystery, but you've been entrusted with this message and this mystery. So be a good steward of that mystery. Be a good steward of the very words of God. And then he talks about what I call the inward truth, verse number 2. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. That word required in verse 2 makes people feel very uncomfortable because it means that we are expected of something. People don't tend to appreciate expectations. They don't tend to enjoy the idea that you have an expectation on my life. The main thing, or the leading thing in this office in verse number 2, is that they are required to be stewards that are found faithful. That idea of steward is the idea that I am a servant to the very mysteries of God. I am a servant to God himself, that I am found faithful. Now, I want you to notice in verse number 2, those words, be found, is a word that is, in the Greek language, it is at any point in time for the entirety of the story. Here's what I mean. It is a snapshot word. That if we're to take a snapshot of your life at any point in time of your life and we freeze frame that in that freeze frame, you're faithful. And then we fast forward a little bit and we keep going and screenshot and then faithful. And then at every little point that we could do, I remember when I was a kid, we had slides. And not slides, but we had the one with the thing and the cube even, and they would fall down. And how many of you remember that? How many of you had one of those at home? How many of you have no idea what I'm talking about? Okay. You really don't know what we're talking about? I was going to say you're too young to know what I'm talking about. But I need to show you these things. It's incredible. We have. Dad's not here. Do we still have these things? Then we had one that was a carousel, and it would spin, and you would see these snapshots, and they would go up and down, and that's the picture. You've seen that one? Okay, very. You are still young. I'm going to throw that out there. But in every snapshot of life, what happens next? It says in verse 2, the word faithful. That word faithful literally is to say total trustworthiness. There is a trait that God is not only searching for in this church, that God is not only searching for of his servants, but he is requiring of his servants. And that is total trustworthiness. Let me ask you a question. What is it that you can be totally trusted with? Who in this world can you completely and totally trust? This does not seem like a fair requirement that God is going to require this of me. But when you go to work, your job has requirements. If you don't fulfill those requirements, you may get fired. That's not unheard of. Usually they'll tell you what those are ahead of time. Let's say this is what we require of you. And here we are in 2024, and we're looking at verse number 2, and it still says that it is required, that it is found faithful in these servants, that that's who we are, total trustworthiness, that God can completely trust us. And I'll say this, as the servant of the Lord, we should embrace the expectation. That's a hard thing to sell. Because again, we don't tend to love expectations that are put on us. And what we should do is embrace the idea that this is what God expects of us, that he expects me to be faithful in everything that I do as the minister of Jesus Christ. That's not me as a pastor. He is writing this to a church full of people. He's not writing this to the pastor at the time. He's writing it to the church. I saw a cartoon just this week, and it was a young boy, and he was toe-to-toe, is supposed to be a fourth grader in the cartoon, and he's toe-to-toe with his teacher. And behind the teacher is a math board with incomplete math problems on the board. And the little boy is saying to his teacher, "I'm not an underachiever. You're an over-expector." That's pretty good. I like that. I don't think any of us would be bold enough to stand up to God today and say, "God, I'm not an underachiever, you're an over-expector." I don't think we would say that. However, with our life, we will excuse our lack of faithfulness. In our life, we will make up excuses as to why we haven't been faithful in various areas of life. Why we haven't been faithful to the various things and topics and things that God has invited us to do and asked us to be a part of, whether it be ministries, whether it be church, whether it be other things. It doesn't matter. We will make excuses when the word is very clear that he requires this of the people that have been trusted with the mysteries of God. The faithful servant embraces the expectation of faithfulness. It's not a bad thing. I want you to notice verse 3. It says right here, "But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you, or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. For I know nothing by myself, yet am I not hereby justified. But he that judgeth me is the Lord. Therefore judge nothing before the time until the Lord come, who both will bring to light the hidden things of darkness and will make manifest the counsels of the heart. And then shall every man have praise of God." Let's break this down. The faithful servant leaves judgment to the Lord. In every relationship that I am not faithful, the issue is not between me and the other party. Ultimately, it is a failure between me and God. You say, where do you get that from? Well, it tells us right here, Paul makes a statement. It's a very small thing that I am judged by you. He says, I allow my judgment to be in the Lord. The other parties suffer the consequences of my broken trust and my broken attitude and so forth. But he says this, it's a small thing for me to be judged of you. Then I'm judged of the Lord. As a faithful servant, I'm going to allow the judgment to rest in God's hands. Here's the idea. Paul is saying this, I am not faithful because I have to stand before you. Paul says, I'm faithful because I have to stand before the Lord, and I'm going to leave that judgment up to him. There might have been other people in the church, and there are some that will write about this. There might have been people in the church who were not being faithful, and people were pointing the finger and saying, oh, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And Paul is reminding them, your faithfulness is between you and God. That's why it's not bothering me if you dislike me, he says. If you don't think that I'm faithful, I don't care. That's not between you and me. That's between me and God. And I will allow God to do that. Therefore, he says, judge nothing before the time, he says in verse number 5. So Paul was unconcerned with the judgment of men, whether it was good or whether it was bad. He was concerned with his testimony, but he was not concerned with judgment. He was concerned. I do believe that Paul was interested in how people thought about him, but he wasn't interested in their judgment of him. They couldn't send him to heaven or hell. He wasn't worried about that. But he wasn't living for them anyway. He wasn't concerned with how he judged himself, he says in verse number 4. For I know nothing by myself. He said, I'm not even judging myself. Paul knew that the Lord would hold him accountable for his faithfulness. Let me make this statement. There was no living pleasing others. And I say this, I think it's an impossibility to please all of the people that are around you anyway. Aesop, I believe, said it the best. If you're familiar with Aesop's fables and so forth from elementary school English class perhaps, but he might have said it the best when he said, try to please everyone and you will please no one. I believe that to be true. Living pleasing others is not something, it is an impossibility. It's not something that we can do. So be careful in passing out awards for yourself, he says in verse number 5. Look what he says. He says, therefore judge nothing before the time until the Lord come, who both will bring to light the hidden things of darkness. We'll talk about that. And will make manifest the counsels of the heart. And then shall every man have praise of God. God is the one who reveals the hidden things of the heart. This is the idea that someone is faithful, but God knows the reasons behind the faithfulness. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever done something because of obligation and because you thought, I need to do this, I have to do this, and I'm supposed to do this, so I'm going to do it? But it's surely not because our heart was completely behind it and in our love for the Lord Jesus Christ. He tells us right here in verse number 5 that the Lord is going to reveal those inner parts of our heart, that God is the one who sees that inner part, the inner reasons. God will reveal the designs and the intents of the heart, is what he says in verse number 5. And when the time is right, then their praise is going to be given. When the time is right. For the faithful servant who allows the Lord to bring about the judgment. When the time is right, it's going to come. My faithfulness should not be judged by and according to others, but rather by God, who knows all I do, why I do it, and the inner thoughts when I do it. I shouldn't be judged on your faithfulness, and you shouldn't be judged on mine. What he is saying is this: you do all of this for the Lord. It is entirely possible to be faithful in action, but to be unfaithful in attitude and heart and mind, etc. It is possible to be faithful in action and unfaithful in all the other areas. It takes no talent, it takes no ability, it takes no money, it takes nothing special at all to be faithful. So let me ask you this question. How catastrophic does something have to be to keep you from being faithful to the things of God? How catastrophic? Hurricane? Catastrophic. We had trees fall on houses in our neighborhood. That happened on a Monday. If those people didn't go to church on Wednesday, I get it. There's a tree in your living room that wasn't there on Sunday. It's catastrophic. We get it. How catastrophic does it have to be for me to stop being faithful to the Lord in various areas? What I find is that people settle for much less things, and they rob the Lord of their faithfulness for something much smaller than disaster. So ask yourself the question: am I prepared in verse number 2 with what is required of me as a steward and what will be judged of me of God? Am I required to face God with that? People give lack of faithfulness for much less. Can I say this, that every act of a lack of faithfulness is a lesson that we teach and build into the foundations of the people that are around us. Whatever is big enough to keep me out of church and keep me out of the Word of God is something that I am teaching my children is worth being out of church for. See, when I look at these texts and I say this, I told you in verse number 2, these are very difficult and harsh words that Paul is using. There's not much leeway in verse number 2 when he uses the word required. Can God trust you with anything and everything for His kingdom to move forward? Can God trust you? Are you completely and totally trustworthy? Or a word that I like to use, would we be considered relentlessly faithful? Are we relentlessly faithful? That's a tough one. I don't know the answer to that in your life. Matter of fact, you say, Heath, you're talking all these things and you just told us not to judge one another. And you're judging us right now. You're being judgy. And I'm telling you that you're being judgy by telling me that I'm being judgy. So stop doing that. Not judging anybody, just trying to be honest. Just trying to be fair with what the text says and what Paul says. He's saying, listen, let the Lord handle all of those things. What I'm saying is, let's get it past our initial emotion and let's take it all the way down to our heart and ask our hearts the question, am I totally trustworthy for the Lord? If the Lord needed something done, could He move upon my heart and know that it's going to be done? There are young people that I've worked with that if I gave them a task, I never even checked back on them because I knew they would get it done. So I never looked back again. There were young people that I did that for, and I probably should have been checking. You have people like that where you work. Are you relentlessly faithful? Let me share 3 things, then we'll be done. How can we be the faithful servants to the Lord in our culture? Paul is asking, keep in mind, he's asking for someone to be relentlessly faithful. He's saying it is required that we are faithful in every snapshot of life. These are the words that are used in the Greek language. In every snapshot of life, that we are faithful in the midst of a culture who is Christless. It's not as if people outside of the church are still encouraging and still supportive of your religious beliefs in a follower of Jesus Christ. We kind of live in that world a little bit where we are. Where people leave and say, hey, you want to have those minutes? I think it's great that you're religious. They'll say things like that. Not the culture where they were. He's saying, I want you to be religiously faithful. I am requiring that you be religiously faithful in a culture that doesn't care anything about the Lord Jesus Christ. So how can we be the faithful servants to the Lord in this culture? Number 1, we can know that the mystery and the message belong to God. The mystery and the message belong to God. Here's the thing, friends. It's not my mystery and it's not my message. You go back and you look there in verse number 1. He says, we are ministers of Christ, the servants of the mysteries of God, the hidden things of God, the messages of God that have to get out. It's not mine. That's God's message. So here's the thing. When we get attacked for our faithfulness to the Lord, they're not actually attacking us. They're attacking the Lord who owns the message and the mystery, not me. It's easier for me to keep plugging forward despite a culture that does not love the Lord because I know that it's not a rejection of me that they're doing. It is a rejection of Jesus Christ. And so we can know. The mystery and the message belong to God. Number 2, we can be fully aware of what the Lord is expecting of us. Be fully aware. Because when the time comes in verse number 5, when the time of judgment comes, when we stand before the Lord, there are no questions as to whether or not this is what God requires of us. I love how in verse number 2, it does not say that it is required of the stewards that they be talented and that they give God every single piece of their ability and God will use all of those abilities. It doesn't say that. It says that God requires that they be faithful. We know what the Lord is expecting. Number 3, we can seek the approval and be faithful to only God. To seek only the approval of God. To seek to be faithful only to God. We've talked about it before, having just an audience of one, that's how we're living. That what we're doing is, as we go through life and as we go through our days, what we're doing is trying our very best, not to please the people that are around us, but to only please one in this entire world, and that is the person God. Where we say, I am just seeking His approval, I'm not seeking yours. And here's the thing, when you and I seek the approval of only God, then what other people think in terms of our faithfulness, it falls to the wayside. So we just be faithful to the Lord. As we know, the Olympics are ending today, and some people have watched it religiously for the last, I think it's today, day 16. Is it, there 16 days of Olympics? Who has been watching religiously the Olympics? It's okay if you have watched. Okay, so there's a few people, several people been watching. It's okay. It's like we're not about to make fun of you, I promise. Like that's why I know you're afraid. Like every time I raise my hand, he jumps on me. Not, I promise. So the Olympics are going on, and it ends today, and I think there's still a few events today. It's probably ending maybe right now, like because there's 7 hours ahead of us, I think, and there's like closing ceremonies, and I think Tom Cruise is doing something. I think Snoop is doing something. Like it's the weirdest Olympics I've ever. Anyway, all these things going on. I think America has a chance to win a couple more gold medals today, and possibly win the gold thing, and all the overall medals, and all this kind of stuff. It's a very exciting time. Anybody happen to catch the diving competitions? We got sucked in to synchronized diving. Huh? This is incredible. Two people diving, and Jamie and I were watching, and every single one that we saw, everyone, Jamie's like, that's a perfect 10. And you're watching it in normal speed, and they're like doing the things, and then going in, and then there's no splash. And you're like, whew, that's a perfect 10. And then they get like a, 6.5, 6.5, 7.0, whatever. And Jamie's like, I thought it was a perfect 10. And then they show it in slow motion. You're like, oh, they stink. That's the problem, is they stink at this, And she never actually said that. But I mean, you're like, oh, they're not really synchronized together like you think. But with the naked eye, it's like, that's incredible. Next group goes by. Same thing. 4.5, triple whatevers. And then no splash. And Jamie's like, perfect 10. That's a perfect 10. It's unbelievable. And then you watch it again, and they show it in slow motion. And it's like, they're not even together at all. How did they even get in this competition? And you're watching these people do these incredible dives, and one after another, and it's like, wow, these people are incredible. And the splashes, and I was so hoping. Like when that one team is like mathematically eliminated from the medals? How many of you, I want to see a cannonball. I want a 10-meter, just straight up, everybody's trying to make no splash. I'm like, watch this, and just splash everybody. I want to see it, because when you're out, you're out. But I think that would like be viral, like it would, and then you'd be YouTube famous or whatever. And that's what you want to be. So I'm watching all these things, just hoping for that. Like, you're in last place, just do it. And they wouldn't do it. There's a young lady from China. This year, she's 17 years old. In the last Olympics, she was 14. 14 years old, she's representing her country. China has so many people. And they found this girl, and I'm going to try to say her name, and I don't want to say it incorrectly, but I believe her name is Quan Hongchan. And this year she's 17 years old, but when she was 7 years old, she was playing hopscotch outside of her school, and a coach saw her and said, she's got some jumping ability. We need to see if she can dive. So they turned her into a diver. And at age 14, she represented China in the Olympics in Tokyo, to where she won gold at age 14. The second youngest gold medalist ever. That blew me away. And then I just got disgusted with my own children. Again, it's like, why? Why can't you dive? Why is a cannonball all you have? Because that's what I trained them on. Anyway, so I'm watching this thing, and this girl, she trained from the age of 7, and this year 17, she got actually a perfect score in diving, not synchronized diving by herself. She got a perfect score at age 14 in the dive. She won the gold again this year. The girl's unbelievable. She is a person who expects perfection, and her coach was talking about this idea of her perfection and how she'll get into the pool and she'll dive, and she'll come out of the pool, and she'll ask a question, and she gets upset if the coach doesn't have the answer for her within a minute. That she needs to make an adjustment on that dive, and if you can't tell me what I did wrong, you need to do it faster than what you're doing. This is how gold medalists think, by the way. Not content with the silver or the bronze or taking times off. Matter of fact, because of her, this is incredible. Because of her, the Chinese language invented a new word to talk about her level of excellence. Now, I cannot say it in Mandarin Chinese, but the definition of the word is this: water splash disappearance technique. That's the word that they created for her standard of excellence. That's incredible to me. I've never invented a word. I mean, I've made up some words, I think, that aren't actual words. But there's never been a word created in the English language because of my effort and my excellence in my word, nor is there one for you either. They invented a word for her. Friends, you don't get to be on TV in the Paris Olympics without spending time on the diving board, in the pool, on the track. People running 100 meters in less than 10 seconds. There's God-given ability there. There's no doubt about that. I could train from birth to 46 and I can't run a sub-1000. There's God-given ability, but there's techniques, and they're working every day because every single footstep matters when you're taking 3 steps and then jumping a hurdle. And if they get off, they hit the hurdle. if they get off, it drives them insane, and they just have to go back and they do it again, and they re-film, and they watch themselves running, and they watch on film, and they watch behind them and in front of them and to the side of them, and they want to get every single step to excellence. They want every dive, every tuck, every water disappearance technique correct. That is faithfulness. But it's faithfulness for a fleeting moment. It lasts for as long as your national anthem. And then it's over. You'll say, oh, they'll always be an Olympic gold medalist. But not in 4 years they won't be. Not in 8 years perhaps. The girl that's 17, she might be in 4 years, but she won't be 15 years from now. And I look at these things and I look at what God is requiring of us, and here's what he's doing. He's asking us to do something that will last for our lifetime. That we can become a monument of faithfulness. That when people look at us, they see a faithful servant, and they give their lives to Christ because there's something in you that they don't have. And they look at that and they say, what is it that they have that I don't have? And it is a faithfulness to their Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And they're challenged because you are a monument of faithfulness, not because you got there on your own, but because of the heroes that were before you, that you stand on their shoulders and you carry on their faithfulness. The greatest way that I can honor the people who've invested in my life is to continue to be faithful to our Lord Jesus Christ. That's it. I can't do anything that would honor them more. I'm going to invite you to pray with me, if you would, please. As we go to the Lord in prayer, I want to ask you, are you